Dr. Bryce Hughes' work looks into the frameworks of 21st century universities and shares his reflections tonight on identity and experience in translating research into practice for a better way of life. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Dr. Bryce Hughes.
All right, I'm giving this a shot to see if I can give this talk without standing behind the podium. Thank you all for your support here tonight. I want to congratulate all of the other award winners as well. I think it's been nice to hear some wonderful talks from my colleagues and get, I guess, a different side of the work that they do. I only get to see a glimpse of what goes on in their offices, so it's nice to have some of that here on display for all of you. I first heard, well, I don't know if I first heard it, but I most recently heard the term me-search in Dr. Lisa Wolf-Wendell's presidential address to the Association for the Study of Higher Education. Dr. Wolf-Wendell used the term as a way of encapsulating what the researcher does in the research process. Obviously, many of us who conduct studies with communities work with those communities and play an active role in helping them solve problems that are important to them. But it also reflects the fact that a lot of the research questions that we're asking or the problems that we tackle come from our own experiences, or that they're important to us in some way. As I got to thinking about a thread that is woven through the topics that I've chosen to pursue in my research program, I came back to the point that a lot of them come fundamentally from life experiences that I had within the education system, both personally and professionally. I also began to reflect on the field that I'm involved with, higher education, and realized that we too study ourselves. We study the very institutions at which we work. So tonight I want to share some of my reflections on the motivations for the work that I've done and why I continue to think that research is so important for society. So first of all, a lot of the research I've looked at looks at the experiences of undergraduate college students. And as a result, many of the questions that I've been asking began with experiences that I had when I was an undergraduate. For instance, I'm interested in the effects of attending different types of universities, and in particular, what it's like to attend a religiously affiliated university. And obviously that comes from the fact that I went to a fairly well-known Catholic university with maybe you've heard of their basketball team. And then my undergraduate degree is in engineering, and although I've never actually worked as an engineer, I've found that a lot of the questions I've asked go back to experiences that I had in terms of what it was like for me as an engineer, as well as ways that we can improve the education process for our students. What I would say would be most influential from my undergraduate experience in terms of influencing my research program, though, was that when I was an undergraduate, that was when I came to terms with my identity as a gay man and subsequently became a campus activist at Gonzaga, advocating for a more inclusive campus environment. I've also had many professional experiences that have gone into my research, and I know many of my colleagues in education have also taught for years before coming in before their research training, and are also looking into similar problems. When I finished my student affairs degree, one of the first jobs I had was working with peer mentors at a community college in their diversity office. And then I discovered the world of STEM education research when I entered my PhD program at UCLA. My dissertation topic looks back on some of those undergraduate experiences I had, asking the question about how faculty, staff, and students at a Catholic university address LGBT issues. And then finally, in my role at the Higher Education Research Institute, I helped advocate for the inclusion of items pertaining to sexual orientation and gender identity on their national surveys of college students. So as I got to thinking about why on earth I'm going to talk about research tonight to an audience that's not completely composed of people who do research, I began to wonder why was it so important to me and why I made it such a central focus of my career. And I would say all of us, in one way or another, spend most of our lives trying to make sense of the world around us. For those of us who are scientists and scholars, this is generally through the process of research. And for those of us in education, it's the desire to improve the very institutions in which we work and continue to work. Kind of like what Sarah talked about in terms of helping our future educators go out into the world and make a bigger impact than they may have otherwise. So in thinking about that, then, some of the projects that I've been involved with reflect many of those experiences I mentioned, and in many ways represent intersections of those experiences that have led me to unique questions that I found personally valued, that have also seemingly made a contribution to the field. So the first is that I'm wrapping up some of that dissertation work, trying to get a couple articles published this year out of my dissertation on LGBT issues in Catholic education, and I'm starting to ask some new questions in that area in terms of what else we might want to know. The vast majority of the research I've been involved with, though, focuses on STEM education, and many of you who work with me probably can recognize that. There are 3 projects I've been involved with that look at STEM education across the preschool through graduate school continuum. I have one that Nicholas Lux, my colleague in the department, is the PI on, where we are looking at the use of the gaming platform Minecraft as a tool for teaching spatial reasoning skills to middle school students. The second one is with a colleague over in industrial engineering, asking the question, to what extent might we start fostering leadership skills in engineering students by having them see themselves as engineering leaders, or develop a sense of identity as engineering leaders? And then the third is with a faculty member in physics and a couple other folks around campus, working on improving the communication skills of graduate students in STEM by teaching them improv and storytelling skills as a way to build stage presence and infuse narrative into the ways they talk about research. And then finally, as an outcome of helping get those items on the national surveys at the Higher Ed Research Institute, I've been able to ask some questions about what it's like for LGBTQ students in STEM, which has opened some doors to collaborations with colleagues across the nation. And Elizabeth Bird might attest that I just sent a letter of intent this afternoon for a research grant in that area. So then, as I reflected on the fact that a lot of these projects are influenced by my own personal experiences and address what I think are important problems, I've come to terms with the fact that research is not an apolitical process. I would argue that my colleagues, even in the life and physical sciences, to some extent were motivated by their life experiences to pursue questions of curiosity to them. And all of us who are involved with research choose important problems to study because we want our research to make an impact. To that extent, the decision to take on a project could be considered a moral and/or ethical choice. Finally, because of this, we employ a number of procedures that help make sure that what we do is of value and makes a difference, including applying rigorous methods that are widely accepted in our fields, by approaching the topics that we study with a sense of skepticism, and by subjecting our work to review by our peers to ensure its quality. I have this example up here of climate change. I was listening to a podcast last summer, and the hosts were interviewing a scientist about this issue and asking the question around why there's such a wide consensus on the impact of humans on climate change. And the answer is somewhat surprising. When the proposition was first raised, and I think it's the late 70s, don't quote me right now, but scientists were very skeptical that humans were having such an impact on the environment that they actually set out to try to disprove it and put it aside. And it was from that work that the evidence began to stack up. So with that regard, because we choose to take on important projects that we hope will make an impact on the world, the best research is research that improves the way that we live our lives. I know here at Montana State, integration has become one of our core professional values as the university encourages faculty to think about how do we bring research into the classroom when we're training students? How do we take research out into the community so that our outreach projects help uplift the communities around us using the benefits from what we're learning? As a result, we as researchers then have an obligation to make sure that our research is accessible to the public. We can't simply let our studies die in journals where they're only going to be read by our peers. Finally, I bring up an example related to this, kind of returning back to my point earlier about the study of higher education. So many of you may have heard the stereotype that colleges and universities are a little bit insular and possibly resistant to change. And so you might imagine that the decision to study colleges and universities while employed at a university feels like one of the world's greatest exercises in navel-gazing. If we stop to think about the impact and size of the enterprise of higher education, though, the number of colleges and universities, the amount of resources that go into our work, and the number of lives that our institutions touch, whether directly or indirectly, I think I might be able to argue that the study of higher education is essential, and we are approaching important problems. So if we come back to my original point about me search as a way of rediscovering the me in research, in a time when faith in science and research is starting to erode, I want to argue that by reclaiming the me in research, by pointing to the fact that researchers are working on important problems, that the outcomes of what we study are intended to improve our lives, we might be able to reestablish faith in science and discovery as a shared social value. Thank you. I suppose now I have to take some questions. And I'm perfectly okay with their own day.
There's an opportunity later as well.
When my husband's father, who started working at a community college, he always said that more wars are fought in the name of religion than any other cause.
Oh yeah,
That was true.
thank you.
Are you finding that LGBTQ students feel excluded in STEM majors?
Yes. Similar to students from other underrepresented groups, but there's kind of a unique issue around this question of professionalism, what's appropriate to, I guess, talk about. There are a lot of people who are surprised when scientists and engineers disclose their sexual orientation. They either ask questions like, I don't know exactly what the relevance of that is, or why that would be important for me to know, to, it's not professional for you to share that in a setting like this, this is not something that we would care to hear about, without really critically reflecting on, but there are ways that we all share these types of personal experiences without realizing that, say, talking about a spouse, talking about family might actually be also revealing sexual orientation. A paper I published showed that the percentage difference is not huge. It's about 7 percentage points different between the percentage of heterosexual students who are retained over 4 years versus LGBTQ students, but it's large enough to be significant.